They told me it was a sacred calling, a life of holiness, silence, and perfect devotion. But behind those stone walls, I found not peace, but chains. This is not just my story. It's the story of countless women who entered the convent seeking God and instead found control, fear, and spiritual confusion. What you're about to hear is not easy, because for years I kept it hidden, just like they wanted. But now, the truth must come out. From testimonies like Mariam Rawandi to hidden historical documents, we're going to uncover what was never meant to be exposed. This isn't an attack on faith, it's a cry for freedom. Because Christ never called anyone to serve in bondage. He came to set us free. If you believe in truth and spiritual freedom, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And tell me this in the comments: can blind obedience ever be holy? They say silence is sacred. But in the convent, silence was control. The day I walked through those heavy wooden doors, I believed I was answering a call from heaven. I left behind my family, my name, my dreams. They told me I was now the bride of Christ. But soon, that beautiful title began to feel like a prison sentence. Every morning began with a bell, not a gentle chime, but a sharp, commanding clang that told us we no longer belonged to ourselves. Prayer, chores, more prayer, meals in silence, confession, obedience, repression. The same cycle day after day, and the worst part wasn't the structure. It was the suffocating sense that questioning any of it meant I was sinning. That thinking was rebellion. I remember the day they shaved my head. It wasn't just hair they took, it was identity. We were told this was humility, that losing everything made us pure. But I didn't feel pure. I felt erased. There were sisters who smiled through it. And there were others who cried at night, faces hidden in their hands in the dim candlelight, begging God to speak. But heaven stayed quiet. And when we cried too loud, we were told to confess our spirit of rebellion. One sister, Magdalena, once whispered to me during morning chores. She said, "Do you ever wonder if this is what Jesus meant when he said, 'Follow me'?" Her voice trembled with fear because even asking that was dangerous. If the Mother Superior heard her, she'd be called into isolation, days without speaking, meals taken alone, a forced fast to purify her thoughts. That was the punishment for doubt. They taught us that obedience was the highest virtue, that even if we didn't understand, we must obey, even if it hurt, we must submit. The flesh must be crucified, they said. But isn't crucifixion supposed to be Christ's sacrifice, not ours? And so the days went on, with chants echoing through the halls, prayers spoken without feeling, and confessions of sins we didn't even understand. Some sisters confessed thinking about their families. Others confessed imagining life outside the convent. One girl was punished for dreaming. Dreaming! She had told the confessor that she dreamed she was dancing, and they said it was carnal. She was denied communion for a week. That girl, her name was Clara. She stopped talking after that, not just out of fear, it was like her spirit broke. And still, we were told this was love, that this was the narrow path to God. But what kind of love thrives on fear? What kind of faith demands you abandon who you are? They gave us books, but only the ones they approved. We weren't allowed to read the Bible on our own, only with interpretation, only under supervision. I remember once opening to John 8:32, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." That verse haunted me. Free. What did freedom mean in a place where every thought, every action, every question was monitored? There was a strange contradiction in it all. They said we were holy, chosen, sacred, but at the same time, we were treated like children, incapable of thinking, unworthy of deciding. Our vows were forever. Breaking them meant eternal condemnation. They said it with soft voices, gentle eyes, but the weight of that message crushed us. We weren't allowed to speak to priests without permission, and if a priest visited, we had to bow our heads low. Never meet his eyes, never speak unless spoken to. Because even in this sacred space, power still followed the old lines. Some of the older nuns had been there for decades. Their faces were like stone, eyes without light. I often wondered, did they ever believe, or had they simply forgotten how not to? One day, everything cracked. Sister Ruth collapsed in the hallway. She was thin, fragile, like glass. They said she was fasting for her sins. Fasting for weeks. She hadn't spoken in days. And when they tried to carry her to her room, she whispered, "Jesus doesn't want this." That phrase stayed in my soul like fire. Jesus doesn't want this. What if he didn't? What if we had been lied to, not with words of hatred, but with words dressed in piety? What if faith had been hijacked by fear? I started to see it, the way manipulation wrapped itself in scripture, the way control hid behind discipline, the way abuse disguised itself as spiritual formation. I read testimonies later from women like Mariam Rawandi. Her story was like mine, a calling, a journey, and then the pain of realizing that the God she sought had been buried beneath a system built by men. She spoke of long nights in solitude, of weeping on cold floors, of feeling invisible even to heaven. And yet, when she left, she found Jesus again, not in rules, but in relationship. That's what no one tells you, that you can serve God outside of a convent, that your love for him doesn't have to mean losing yourself. That chastity, silence, and obedience are not the only ways to show devotion. In fact, when they are forced, they are no longer holy. They become chains. I want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself this. If Christ came to set us free, why do so many religious systems look like prisons? And maybe you've never been inside a convent. Maybe this story feels far from you. But how many of us have lived under some form of religious pressure? How many have been told that doubt is evil, that questioning is rebellion, that freedom is dangerous? That's why this story matters. Because it's not just about nuns. It's about anyone who has ever been told that God's love comes with conditions, anyone who has ever been shamed for thinking differently, anyone who has ever been silenced in the name of spiritual authority. The truth is, Jesus never called anyone to disappear. He called us to follow him, fully, freely, with heart and mind alive. And when systems crush that, they are not from him. We'll go deeper into this because what's coming next will shock you even more. Historical evidence, secret documents, first-hand confessions, and above all, a revelation of the freedom we were always meant to have. But before we continue, I want to invite you to take a step with me. If this video is resonating with you, if you believe more people need to hear this truth, then hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss these revelations. And don't forget to turn on the notifications, because what's hidden must be brought into the light. And leave your comment below. Do you think forced religious vows can ever lead someone to true holiness? Or are they just another form of spiritual slavery? There's a name you probably don't hear often, the Apostolic Constitution Sponsor Christi. Issued by Pope Pius XIII in 1950, it laid out the canonical regulations for nuns, cloistered ones especially. But what most people don't realize is that these documents didn't just encourage devotion, they formalized a system where silence, separation, and submission were spiritualized. According to these rules, a nun could spend her entire life behind walls, never seeing her family again, never speaking freely, never touching another soul with affection. And all of this in the name of holiness. But is isolation the same as sanctification? Let's take a step back. Historically, the Church exalted virginity and celibacy as the higher way. Marriage was good, but virginity, that was sacred. Women were told that if they truly wanted to give themselves to God, they should renounce marriage altogether. Not just sex, intimacy, companionship, motherhood, choice. And once inside the walls of the convent, that renunciation became a lifelong vow. But what they didn't tell us is that many women weren't given full understanding of what they were entering. Some were teenagers. Others were coerced by family expectations, financial struggles, or cultural shame. You see, for centuries, poor families would offer their daughters to the church not just for spiritual reasons, but because they couldn't afford to marry them off. Becoming a nun became a solution to poverty, a way to honor the family. But was it a calling or a transaction? Mariam Rawandi wrote in her journal, "They told me I was marrying Christ, but the veil they gave me felt more like a burial shroud. I remember when I took my final vows, there was incense, chanting, and tears, but not because I was overjoyed. I was terrified. They said I was now dead to the world, a living martyr. I laid flat on the ground, while the litany of the saints echoed through the chapel. They covered me with a black pall, just like at a funeral, symbolically buried. They said it was beautiful. I felt cold. After that day, everything changed. I wasn't just expected to obey, I was expected to disappear. Personal opinions were discouraged. Emotional outbursts were labeled attachments. Friendships among sisters were monitored. We were told that love, even sisterly affection, was a temptation. I started to realize that what we were practicing wasn't faith anymore. It was detachment from life. One nun, Sister Rosa, tried to leave. She was in her 30s. She had joined at 18. She wrote a letter to the bishop asking for dispensation from her vows. For weeks, no one saw her. When she returned, her eyes were hollow. She was corrected. That's the word they used. They made her scrub the chapel floors every day for a month, in silence. They said it was penance for her confusion, and she never tried again. Why were we so afraid? Why did the very people who claimed to protect us keep us bound? And why did questioning their system feel like betraying God? Let's talk about blind obedience, the kind that doesn't ask questions, the kind that silences your spirit. That's what the system demands, because when you stop thinking, you stop resisting. And when you stop resisting, you're easier to control. There's a dangerous myth that suffering is inherently holy, that the more you deny yourself, the closer you are to God. And yes, sacrifice can be powerful when it's chosen. But when suffering is imposed, when it's used to silence you, it becomes abuse. And here's the thing, even in the Gospels, Jesus never forced anyone to follow him. He invited, he called, he welcomed, but never coerced. So why does the church, in so many instances, do what Christ never did? I began reading the Bible for myself, secretly, at night, with a flashlight under the sheets. And what I found stunned me. The Jesus of the Gospels wasn't a cold taskmaster. He touched lepers. He wept with the broken. He rebuked religious leaders for placing heavy burdens on people. That Jesus, the real Jesus, felt so far from the system I was trapped in. One verse kept echoing in my heart. Galatians 5:1. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. That verse broke me, because that's what I was in, a yoke. Not of Christ, but of control. I started to see the pattern. The system depended on us believing we were unworthy, that our thoughts were dangerous, that our desires were sinful, because if we ever truly believed we were loved just as we were, we might walk out. I prayed like never before, not the rote prayers, but raw, trembling words. I cried out, "God, is this really what you want for me?" And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't in years, peace. Not from the convent, not from the system, but from Him. And then slowly, courage began to grow. I wasn't sure if I would leave. I didn't even know how, but I knew I had to reclaim my faith, not the faith they gave me, the faith God planted in me long before I entered the convent. The first step was speaking out loud what I had only thought in secret. This is not holy. And when I finally whispered those words to another sister, not in rebellion, but in honesty. She broke down, sobbing. Because she felt it too. We all did, but we were too afraid to say it. That's when I knew the problem wasn't our hearts. The problem was the fear we had been taught to worship. Many ex-nuns carry shame. They leave the convent and wonder if they failed. But the truth is, they were brave. Because it takes more faith to walk away from a lie than to stay trapped in one. Some will hear this story and feel anger. Others will deny it. Not all convents are like that, they'll say. And that's true. But many are, and the stories are mounting. From South America to Europe, testimonies are surfacing. Women silenced, controlled, shamed. But there's hope, because freedom is rising. There are communities now for ex-nuns, places where women can heal, share their stories, and rediscover their purpose. Some go on to serve in ministry in new ways. Others start families, write books, become counselors. Their lives didn't end when they left. They began. And here's what they all have in common. Once they walked away from the system, they found Jesus again, not behind the veil, but in the open, not in silence, but in truth. So, what does this mean for you, watching right now? Maybe you've never worn a habit or taken vows, but maybe you felt trapped in a spiritual system that told you who to be, what to believe, and what to hide. Maybe you've been made to feel that your questions were sins, that your emotions were weaknesses, that your freedom was rebellion. Let me tell you this, God is not afraid of your questions. He is not intimidated by your freedom. He created it. And if something or someone has convinced you that true faith means becoming small, silent, and submissive to people instead of to God, then you need to hear this. That's not faith, that's bondage. Faith is alive, it's messy, it's bold, and it always leads you closer to love. Before we dive deeper, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever confused control for holiness? Has your desire to please God ever led you into silence? And if this video is bringing clarity, healing, or even just questions into your heart, then do something right now. Like the video, subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. And share your thoughts below. In your opinion, can spiritual institutions become toxic without even realizing it? How do we draw the line between structure and slavery? They called it a vocation, a divine calling. But the deeper I sank into the life they described as holy, the more I began to wonder who exactly was calling me. Was it God? Or was it the voice of tradition, centuries old, whispering expectations forged not in heaven, but in corridors of institutional power? What I didn't know when I first joined the convent, what no one told me, is that much of what we were living was not based on the teachings of Jesus, but on a legacy of control built over generations. Early church fathers like Tertullian and Jerome wrote extensively about women, often portraying us as weaker, more sinful, inherently tempting. Their writings weren't divine scripture, but their influence shaped theology for centuries. They praised virginity, condemned female expression, and elevated suffering as the proof of purity. And this mindset, this cultural suspicion of women, seeped deep into monastic life. In the convent, we were trained to distrust ourselves. If you felt joy, it was considered suspicious. If you felt desire for anything, even beauty, art, music, nature, it was something to mortify. We were told that the body was the enemy of the soul. That discipline meant denying not just sin, but everything human. And yet the Bible tells a different story. It doesn't say, become less human to be holy. It says God became human to redeem us. Jesus walked among people. He ate, wept, laughed, embraced. He touched the untouchable. He humanized holiness. Why then was our form of devotion so inhuman? One of the cruelest realities of the convent was how pain was spiritualized. If you got sick, it was God purifying you. If you were depressed, you were told to offer it up as a sacrifice. There was no space for therapy, no understanding of trauma, no room for emotional healing. It was all spiritualized, and spiritualized pain becomes a prison. Some sisters would self-inflict wounds. Yes, even today. Not always with whips and chains like in medieval times, but with harsh fasting, physical self-denial, sleeping on the floor, refusing water. These acts were encouraged, even applauded, as signs of holiness. But they were symptoms of deep inner brokenness, masked by devotion. I once knew a sister named Lucia. She was kind, soft-spoken, always willing to help, but she had a sadness in her eyes that never faded. I later learned she hadn't spoken to her mother in 15 years. Not by choice, but by rule. Her superior believed that frequent contact with family could weaken the vocation. When her mother died, she received the letter 3 days later. No one told her. No one let her go to the funeral. She wept in silence, behind the altar, whispering a rosary. I watched her crumble and realized this wasn't holy. This was cruelty in disguise. But we endured it because we were taught that obedience, especially when it hurts, was the highest form of love. And so we spiritualized our pain. We convinced ourselves that the deeper we bled, the closer we were to God. Isn't that how manipulation works? It dresses itself in virtue. It twists truth just enough to make you question your own heart. And this manipulation wasn't always obvious. It was soft, tender even. Our superiors weren't monsters. They were victims too, trained in the same system, shaped by the same fears. Some truly believed they were saving us from ourselves. That's what makes it so dangerous. Spiritual abuse often wears a gentle face, but behind that gentleness is a demand: conform or else. And the or else was terrifying. Expulsion, condemnation, hell. One night I sat in the chapel alone. The candles flickered, the silence felt heavy, and I whispered, "God, are you proud of me?" I didn't feel his presence. I felt absence. Not because he wasn't there, but because I was no longer present in my own life. I had become a shadow. In that moment, a memory flashed in my mind, something I hadn't thought about in years. I was 10 years old, dancing barefoot in the grass, singing a worship song with my arms open wide. I remembered the joy, the freedom, the lightness. That was the last time I truly felt close to God. And I asked myself, what happened between that girl and this shell of a woman in the habit? I'll tell you what happened. I traded relationship for religion, wonder for rules, freedom for fear. And the truth? God never asked me to. When I finally decided to leave the convent, I expected lightning, judgment, shame. But what I found was mercy. Yes, it was painful. Yes, there was loss. But it was clean pain. Not the kind that suffocates you, the kind that heals you, like a wound being washed. Leaving wasn't a rejection of God, it was returning to Him. And that's something many people don't understand. When someone walks away from an oppressive religious system, they're not always rejecting faith. Sometimes they're finally embracing it, fully, freely, honestly. I met so many ex-nuns after I left. Some still trembled when they spoke about their past. Others carried anger thick like armor. A few had healed enough to laugh again, even joke about their years in the habit. But all of them, every single one, had the same thread in their stories. At some point, they realized they weren't following God anymore. They were following rules about God. There was Helena, who spent 22 years in a cloistered convent in Ireland. She told me she had entered at 16 after her father died. Her mother believed it would secure the family's favor with God. Helena lived most of her adult life without ever using money, touching a phone, or walking through a park. She only left the convent after a heart attack forced her hospitalization, and the doctors, seeing her malnourished body and haunted expression, insisted she stay under observation. That hospital stay saved her life. She told me, "I didn't know God had a voice until I heard silence that wasn't enforced. Real silence, the kind where your soul can breathe." There was Angela from Colombia. Her story was different. She joined because she was running away from trauma, from poverty, from abuse. She thought becoming a nun would erase all that pain. Instead, it amplified it. She spent 10 years in a mission convent where she was used more as unpaid labor than anything else. Cleaning, cooking, sewing habits, attending to elderly priests. Not once was she offered therapy or healing for her past. When she tried to leave, she was told she would fall into sin and be lost to the devil. Those words almost kept her trapped, but the whisper of truth inside her wouldn't die. She left. And now, she's a trauma counselor helping former religious workers reintegrate into society. These women are warriors, not because they wore habits, but because they took them off. And yet society doesn't always understand. People romanticize nuns. They imagine us floating in candlelit chapels, serene, praying, smiling, singing in harmony. They don't see the long nights of tears, the psychological coercion, the guilt that eats away at your identity. Many ex-nuns suffer from what therapists call post-cult trauma. Yes, even convents can take on cult-like dynamics. When an institution discourages outside contact, suppresses personal autonomy, isolates you from your support system, and demands absolute allegiance. What else can you call it? And here's where it gets even more complex. Not all convents are the same. Some are healthy, some are genuinely loving communities rooted in faith. But others, and there are many, become echo chambers of obedience where the spirit withers. How can you tell the difference? Look at the fruit. Jesus said, "By their fruit you will know them." Does the community produce love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control? Or does it produce fear, repression, silence, and shame? When I left, I thought I was leaving my place in heaven. That's what they told me. That's what they made me believe. But what I didn't realize was that God was outside the walls too. He wasn't confined to stone cloisters or candlelit rituals. He was in the sunrise, in the voice of a friend, in the warm tears I cried in the car, driving away with only a backpack and the clothes I hadn't worn in years. I remember sitting in a park 2 days after I left. I watched a child chase pigeons. A young couple laughed under a tree. An old man fed squirrels with a gentleness that made my chest ache. Life, real, messy, beautiful life, was happening all around me. And for the first time in years, I wasn't watching it from behind a veil. I was in it. And then I realized something that shook me to my core. I had equated holiness with separation. But God never asked me to separate from life. He asked me to walk with Him in it. Why do we keep confusing spiritual death with spiritual devotion? There's a passage in Isaiah where God rebukes His people, saying, "Is this the kind of fast I have chosen, only a day for a man to humble himself?" And then He explains that true devotion is to loose the chains of injustice, set the oppressed free, and break every yoke. Not silence, not starvation, not self-hatred. Freedom, justice, compassion. I believe we need a new theology of service, one rooted in wholeness, not sacrifice, one that understands that giving to God doesn't mean erasing yourself. It means becoming who you truly are in His image. The world needs more than obedient bodies. It needs healed hearts. And that starts by confronting systems, even religious ones, that perpetuate harm under the guise of faith. So if you're watching this and your story isn't the same as mine, but something in your spirit is stirring, listen to that. Maybe you've never been in a convent, but maybe you've been in a marriage, a church, a family, or a relationship where your voice was silenced in the name of religion. Maybe you've been told that submission is your duty, even when it crushes your soul. Maybe you've been taught that God is more pleased with your suffering than with your healing. That's not the voice of Jesus. That's the voice of fear. Jesus always restores, always frees, always leads with love. And if there's one thing I want you to take from this story, it's this. You are not unholy for wanting joy. You are not sinful for seeking freedom. You are not rebellious for asking questions. Faith that cannot withstand a question is not faith. It's control in disguise. We are entering a time in history where spiritual awakening demands honesty. We can no longer afford to protect traditions at the expense of truth. We must be brave enough to confront the ways systems have failed, and humble enough to build something better. That starts with stories. Stories like mine. Stories like Mariam Rawandi's. Stories like yours, because the truth sets us free, but only when it's spoken. So if you've stayed with me this far, I want to thank you, not just for listening, but for being open, for allowing space in your heart for hard truths and deeper questions. And now, I want to ask something of you. If this video has touched something inside you, if you've felt seen, heard, or maybe even shaken, hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. There's more to come, and click that bell so you don't miss the next chapter. And please, share in the comments. Do you think it's possible to serve God fully without ever stepping into a convent, monastery, or institutional ministry? What does true devotion look like to you? There's something liberating about speaking the truth out loud, about saying the words you were once forbidden to think, about breaking the silence that religion wrapped in gold and called holy. And now, as we come to the end of this journey together, I want to leave you not just with a story, but with a shift. Because this story, my life as a nun, was never about turning you against faith. It's about turning you toward the real Jesus. The Jesus who never demanded vows of silence. The Jesus who never asked women to disappear in order to serve him. The Jesus who walked among the outcasts, healed the broken, and had the courage to flip the tables of a corrupted religious system. He never built walls, he tore them down. So here's the truth I wish someone had told me sooner. You don't have to be erased to be devoted. You don't have to lose your voice to hear his. You don't have to live in spiritual chains to prove your love. God is not a jailer. He is a father, a friend, a redeemer. You can be fully his and still be fully yourself. You can serve him in a convent, in a classroom, in a hospital, in your home, wherever you are, as long as your service flows from love, not fear. Because love is the only offering he ever truly asked for. And when I look back now, I don't regret my time in the convent, because it taught me to recognize the difference between religion and relationship, between submission and surrender, between control and calling. Leaving wasn't the end of my faith. It was the beginning. And maybe, just maybe, this video is the beginning for someone watching right now. Maybe you've carried guilt because you left a system that didn't see you. Maybe you've been told that questioning is rebellion. Maybe you've felt like you're on the outside of God's grace because you couldn't survive inside someone else's version of holiness. Let me tell you something with all the authority of someone who walked through fire and came out free. You are not outside of God's grace. You are exactly where he wants to meet you, right here, right now, in your questions, in your pain, in your search for something more. And if your spirit has been stirred by this story, then please don't keep it to yourself. Let this moment be a turning point. Let this truth travel. Let this message echo into places where silence has reigned too long. Like this video right now, so the platform knows this message matters. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss what comes next. Turn on notifications so you're part of every new revelation we release, and share your voice below in the comments. Share your experience, share your thoughts, or simply answer this. What does freedom in faith look like to you? Let's keep breaking chains together. Until next time, stay awake, stay free, and above all, stay close to the one who never needed a convent to love you.